The truth about money. Who controls it? Money is an interesting topic that touches on so many different aspects of our lives. It can be fun to explore the various myths and mysteries surrounding it, as well as looking at practical applications like how to budget your money or invest for the future. But there's one question that seems to come up again and again. Who controls money? The answer, like with most things in life, is complicated. There are a lot of different factors at play, and no person or organization has complete control over money. So let's take a closer look at who does have a say in how our money works. This is Capitalist Domain, and in today's video, we are going to explore the truth about money. Who controls it? The history of money and why it exists. Most people believe that money was created by governments to facilitate trade and commerce. But the reality is, money predates governments by thousands of years. The first known form of money was barter, which is where two people would exchange goods or services with each other. For example, one person might trade a sheep for a sack of wheat. Barter works pretty well if both parties have what the other party wants and there's no third party involved. But it quickly breaks down when you try to trade with someone who doesn't have what you want, or if there's more than two people involved in the transaction. That's where money comes in. Money is basically anything that is accepted as a means of exchange. It needs to be relatively easy to transport, divisible, and have a stable value. Commodity money is one early form of money that met these criteria. Examples of commodity money include gold, silver, and even livestock. The value of commodity money comes from the fact that it can be used for other things besides exchange, like making jewelry or coins. Another early form of money was fiat money, which is money that is declared by a government to be legal tender. Fiat money isn't backed by anything physical like commodity money, but instead by the government's promise to pay. This means that fiat money has value because people trust the government that issues it. The modern banking system. Today, most countries use a fiat money system, and the primary form of money is currency, which is paper money or coins. Currency is typically issued by a country's central bank, such as the Federal Reserve in the United States. The modern banking system has its origins in medieval Europe, where people would deposit their gold and silver with goldsmiths for safekeeping. The goldsmiths would then issue receipts that could be used to withdraw the same amount of gold or silver at a later date. These receipts eventually evolved into paper money, and the goldsmiths became banks. The banking system we have today is essentially the same as it was back then. Except banks now don't just hold deposits of precious metals, but also deposits of fiat currency. The fractional reserve system. Under the fractional reserve system, banks are required to hold a certain percentage of their deposits in reserve, usually around 10%. This means that if someone deposits $100 into a bank, the bank only has to keep $10 in reserve and can lend out the other $90. This might seem like a risky proposition, but it's actually quite safe because not everyone will try to withdraw their money at the same time. And if some people do want to withdraw their money, the bank can still meet those demands by borrowing from the other banks or by printing more money. The fractional reserve system is how most banks operate today, and it's also how central banks like the Federal Reserve create money. The Federal Reserve and other central banks. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States, and it's responsible for creating currency. But it doesn't just print money out of thin air. The Fed actually creates money through a process called quantitative easing or QE. Under quantitative easing or QE, the Fed buys assets like government bonds from commercial banks. This increases the reserves that banks have on hand, which then allows them to lend more money and expand the money supply. The Fed can also influence the amount of money in circulation by changing the reserve requirement, which is the percentage of deposits that banks are required to hold in reserve. If the reserve requirement is lowered, then banks can lend more money and expand the money supply. In addition to the Fed, there are other central banks around the world, such as the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan. These central banks also use QE to expand the money supply in their respective countries. Who controls the money supply? The answer to this question is both simple and complex. On one hand, it's the central banks that control the money supply. They can print more money or take it out of circulation through quantitative easing or changing reserve requirements. On the other hand, it's also commercial banks that control the money supply. This is because they're able to lend out more money than they have on deposit thanks to the fractional reserve system. So if commercial banks lend out more money, then the money supply will increase. And finally, it's also the people who control the money supply. This is because the amount of money in circulation ultimately depends on how much people are willing to hold on to. If people want to hold on to more cash, then there will be less money in circulation. And if people are willing to hold on to less cash, then there will be more money in circulation. So who really controls the money supply? The answer is all of the above. Central banks, commercial banks, and everyday people all play a role in controlling the money supply. How much money is actually in the circulation? It's estimated that there are about 7.6 billion paper bills and coins in circulation around the world. But this is just a small fraction of the total money supply, which is estimated to be around $90 trillion. The majority of the money supply is actually made up of digital dollars that exist only on computers. This includes things like checking account balances, savings account balances, and money that's been invested in stocks and bonds. So when people talk about the money supply, they're usually referring to the total amount of paper bills and coins in circulation, plus all the digital dollars that exist on computers. What about cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is a type of digital currency that uses cryptography to secure transactions and control the creation of new units. Bitcoin, which was created in 2009, is the most well-known cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is often described as a digital gold because it shares many of the same characteristics as gold. For example, there is a limited supply of Bitcoin that will ever be mined, 21 million. And like gold, Bitcoin is not backed by any government or central bank. Cryptocurrencies are also decentralized, which means they're not subject to the whims of governments or central banks. This makes them appealing to some people who worry about inflation or government manipulation of the money supply. However, cryptocurrencies are still a relatively new and volatile asset class, so they may not be suitable for everyone. What a world without money would look like. A world without money might sound like a utopia, but it's actually a very real possibility. In fact, there are already some places in the world where money is no longer used. The most well-known example is the island of Yap, which is part of the Federated States of Micronesia. For centuries, the people of Yap have used large stones as currency. These stones, which can weigh up to 4 metric tons, are called fei. They're mined from an island about 500 kilometers away and transported back to Yap using canoes. Once a stone arrives on Yap, it becomes the property of whoever owns the canoe that transported it. The stone can then be passed down from generation to generation or used as currency. So how does this system work? Well, let's say you want to buy a boat. You would find someone who owns a boat and offer them some of your fei in exchange for their boat. The transaction wouldn't necessarily involve any physical exchange of the stones. Instead, both parties would simply agree on the value of the stones and adjust their records accordingly. This system might sound strange, but it actually works quite well. In fact, it's been used on Yap for centuries without any major problems. There are other examples of places where money is no longer used. For instance, the city of Swains Island in American Samoa stopped using money back in the 1930s. And in the early 21st century, a group of people in the United Kingdom tried to start a town where money wasn't used. However, the experiment was short-lived and the town eventually reverted back to using regular currency. So, while a world without money is certainly possible, it's not clear if it would be practical or desirable in the long run. The bottom line: money is an essential part of our modern economy. But it's important to understand that money is just an idea. It doesn't have any intrinsic value. While paper bills and coins will continue to play a role in our economy, the majority of the money supply is now digital. And cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are beginning to challenge traditional ideas about what money is and how it should work. In the future, we may even see more changes to the way we use money. So it's important to stay informed and adaptable. Who knows? We may find ourselves one day living in a world where money is no longer used at all. We hope this video helped you understand the origins of money, how it has changed over time, and the possibility of a future where money is no longer used. If you find this informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Any questions or comments? Leave them in the section below. See you in the next video.